Why is it that leaders of companies like WorldCom and Enron, when they fabricated numbers, they all went to jail? And we have laws that send CEOs to jail for knowingly signing off on numbers that are fabricated, but we don't have that same type of accountability with the government. Let's go through some of these things and see what's happening and how we can find out which numbers are believable versus numbers that aren't quite as believable. What's tending to happen with these government numbers is the original numbers that come out, they look really rosy, and then they make these revisions. And the rosy numbers are the ones that are reported in the media. And then when they make these revisions, the new numbers aren't quite as good. And so we're waiting around to find out, well, how are we really? What are the real numbers? And so what we want to look at is things from different sources to see what makes sense. The Bureau of Economic Analysis put out a new report on GDP data that revised all the GDP data going back the last 4 years. It was kind of interesting how they did this. Everything got adjusted and all the GDP data suddenly looks a whole lot better. And what the zero hedge people said was that suddenly we're all $500 billion richer now than we were in August. What doesn't make sense is that this recent government report showed that there was a multi-year high in personal savings. And that didn't make any sense, to me at least, because there's a lot of data that shows other things that don't coincide with this. So what this data here shows is the delinquency rates of credit cards. And so we can see here that delinquency rates of credit cards is the highest it's been in over a decade. And so when we've got record highs in delinquency for credit cards, that doesn't jive with having highs in personal savings as well. Also, the credit card balances. We've got multi-decade highs in credit card balances. And some of these credit cards you have to pay 30% or more on. Why would you have credit card balances where you're paying 30% or more on at the same time we've got a high in personal savings? That doesn't make any sense. Also, the finance charges are at multi-decade highs. So that doesn't make any sense that the finance charges would be so high. And so we're seeing all these numbers that don't jive. So what numbers do you want to trust? You want to trust the numbers that you can see yourself and figure yourself, what you can see when you go to the store, what you can see, I mean, if you ever go to the pawn shop, you can see that the pawn shops may be holding a lot of inventory. When that happens, that usually precedes a recession. You talk to the pawn shop owners and they say that people are really hurting and we're lending money to more people than ever before. That usually shows that's not a good sign. When you look at the banking figures and you can see that their credit card delinquencies are super high, that's not a good sign. And of course the CEOs are punished severely and have to go to jail if they fabricate these numbers. But the government, that doesn't happen with them. The government, people from the government live by a different set of rules. You can also go to the clothing store, the men's clothing store. If there's a lot of underwear sitting on the shelves, men, we've shared this before, they don't buy underwear when things are bad. And so we can also go to the cosmetic store and look at lipstick sales. Ladies tend to buy lots of lipstick because they don't buy the bigger ticket items. And so these are the things that we want to look to. And we're seeing that earnings growth hasn't been all that great outside of the Magnificent Seven, or the biggest, most popular companies in the U.S. Outside of the Magnificent Seven, 2 out of the last 3 quarters, it's been negative. And so regulations have really hit hard to keep these companies from being as profitable, as well as other factors associated with the economy slowing down. One of the last things we look at are job openings. Job openings tend to come down heading into a recession. When that happens, usually the market comes down with it. That did not happen in 2019, and it hasn't happened so far this time. But it typically happens. It's just a matter of time. So we're just playing the waiting game as far as that's concerned. So as far as unemployment is concerned, we've got a situation where we've got a lot of newer workers that are coming in from outside the U.S., and they're the ones that are getting all the jobs. So you can see this in the green, where foreign-born workers are taking up most of the newer jobs. And the native-born workers, we've actually had a loss of jobs among people that have been born in the U.S. So that's something that we've seen over the last year or two. And we can also see that there was a really good jobs report that came out here in beginning of October. And this stunning jobs report, as reported by Zero Hedge, showed a lot of new jobs. The unemployment rate came down from, it bottomed out at 3.4% in April of 2023, and it gotten up as high as 4.3% here recently. But the latest jobs number showed the unemployment rate came down to 4.1%. Most people were expecting 4.5%. It was supposed to be going up, but it actually came down. And what we found is that there were a lot of government jobs that were given out. A lot of people took a lot of government jobs. We had a really high spike in government jobs, which we'll show. The government jobs, usually when government jobs get up higher than 10% of the new jobs, that's usually a sign of an upcoming recession. And it's been at 25%, close to 25%, 25% plus for several months now. And this here's just an article from Benzinga from a few months ago showing the government jobs are making about 25% of the new jobs that are out there. And you can see here that government workers, we hit a new record high as far as government workers are concerned. So we've got more government workers now than we've ever had before. And you can also see that this last month was the highest amount of new government workers that were hired in any time since the pandemic, which was the period right after they were all let go and then hired back. And so we've had a record high of government worker hires over any period except for the pandemic. When we head into a recession, the unemployment bottoms and then it spikes, like here going in the 90s recession and here going into the dot-com recession, the great financial crisis recession, and then the pandemic recession. You see how it bottoms and then spikes. We saw the bottom in mid-23 and it's starting to head up, but we also see the wage growth come down. You can see how the wage growth came down in all these periods as well, and we've definitely seen the wage growth come down in this period, and so this is what we typically see before a recession. The last thing we like to look at is when the Fed finally starts cutting. That usually means we're heading into a recession, and the market typically tops about 60 days before the Fed starts cutting. The last two times when the Fed started cutting, the market topped the next month in the great financial crisis, and the market topped a few months later. They started cutting in 2019 and it didn't top until February of 2020 before the pandemic. And so we can see here that the average downturn once the Fed starts cutting is about 27%. If we've been in an inverted yield curve period, usually it's even worse than the 27% because some of these periods where it didn't go down much, those are periods when we didn't have an inverted yield curve. But what we can note is that once the Fed starts cutting, they're usually wanting to head something off at the pass and they're worried about things. Because you like these videos so much, please feel free to put your thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends, and as always, stay thirsty for knowledge, and that's all for today.